Time now for Scoop, our weekly conversation on international media and the political and economic headwinds confronting the industry. With trust in the press at a nadir, it's a critical eye on a critical profession. They say print is dead. They say TV is dying. But today we're asking if online journalism could be on life support. News sites or publishers are fighting for their survival amid generative AI products like Google's AI Overviews. It summarizes information extracted from various websites which do not receive compensation. That summary is then prominently displayed at the top of the page, while conventional search results are further down. It launched just over 1 year ago in the United States, and from the start there was concern about its impact.
Possibly lead to less website traffic and in turn lost ad revenue since users might not visit the source website. If you're a smaller, less reputable online resource, it's quite possible you may never appear as a source since the algorithm might be inclined to promote more established websites instead.
Fewer clicks on links means fewer ad dollars. Now, earlier this month was the annual Cannes Lions Festival for Creativity and Advertising, a swanky event in the south of France. One of the talking points there was how global ad revenue over the past decade has doubled to $1 trillion, a boom for many, but not all. A decade ago, for every 2 pages Google extracted information from, it sent 1 visitor to a publisher. That ratio has shifted dramatically within the past 6 months, from 6-to-1 to today's 18-to-1. OpenAI's ratio jumping from 251 to 1,500-to-1. Look at Anthropic, from 6,000-to-1 to a staggering 60,000-to-1. That data coming from Cloudflare's CEO, who says publishers face an existential threat.
And what I'm worried about, why I'm wearing black today, and motorcycle boots, even though it's like 32 degrees outside, is I don't know if you can't sell subscriptions and you can't sell ads and you don't get an ego hit from knowing that people are consuming your stuff, why anyone's going to create content.
The stakes are high for the fourth estate. As trust increases in AI products, critics say the likelihood of users clicking through links will continue to diminish. Citing SimilarWeb, the Wall Street Journal wrote that, quote, traffic from organic search to HuffPost websites fell by just over half in the past 3 years and by nearly that much at the Washington Post. This Wednesday, The Atlantic published an article entitled The End of Publishing as We Know It Inside Silicon Valley's Assault on the Media, and it said some have speculated that traffic drops resulting from chatbots were part of the reasons outlets such as Business Insider and The Daily Dot have recently had layoffs. For more, let's speak to our guest, Klaudia Jaźwińska, a research associate at the Tao Center for Digital Journalism. Hello to you, Klaudia. Thank you for patiently waiting. Google used to want to get users off its site as quickly as possible. Now it seems that these new tools are designed to keep them on the Google platform. Media executives are worried about what they call Google Zero. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, Google Zero is something that has been looming for the last couple of years, a fear in the journalism industry. It's a concept coined by the journalist Nilay Patel for the moment where Google search stops sending traffic outside its search engine to third-party websites. And as you mentioned in the clips that just preceded, Google is introducing AI overviews and AI mode, and there's a lot of new chatbots that have live search functionality. And when you can ask a question as a user and get a summarized answer, you are unlikely to then click through to the sources that are linked and to fact check that information because the summary is already there. And that really disrupts publishers' relationship with their audiences and can have significant financial consequences for publishers that rely on click-through traffic to generate advertising revenue.
Last month, you co-published a report along with Peter Brown. It's called Journalism Zero, How Platforms and Publishers Are Navigating AI. Can you take us through the main takeaways of this report?
Sure. So for this report, we interviewed several dozen representatives from the news industry and the technology industry about the state of the relationship between those two industries and how AI is impacting on it. And given the the state of the relationship between those two industries over the last few years, the withdrawal of Facebook and Google from news initiatives that they've had, a lot of news organizations were more cautious around entering formal relationships with AI companies. We've seen the shrinking of journalism partnerships teams at tech companies, and a lot of publishers have decided to reprioritize more stronger and sustainable relationships with their audiences through their own platforms, such as through newsletters, podcasts, and other programming. However, we're seeing now that AI companies really have a strong demand for fresh, trustworthy content, which is what news organizations produce. And so some are wondering whether the approach that AI companies will be more respectful of news organizations.
Yeah, and it's very unclear moving forward. Just to help us sort of frame the discussion here, specifically with AI overviews, I've seen a few figures, but do you have any data on how much it has reduced traffic to outside websites?
We're seeing a lot of different figures reported recently. Broadly, we know that there's been sharp declines for a lot of independent publishers and independent websites from traditional search engines. And we know that there's a growing number of users who turn to chatbots for their searches, things like ChatGPT and Perplexity, but those are only contributing to a very small portion of visits to news sites, and they're not making up for the loss of traffic from Google. And as I mentioned before, there's a growing preference for zero-click experiences. So that is asking a question, reading the summary, and not going through and checking any of the sources that are cited.
Yeah, and that preference, it also speaks to something else, doesn't it? The more people use it, the more people might trust it. And as that trust goes up, that source material is visited less and less. Is that right? Am I drawing the right conclusion there?
That's one element of the problem, is just blindly trusting the answers, which are not often, which we know from various evidence that's come out, that those summaries are not often reliable, that there's a tendency to quote unquote hallucinate. In different research that I've done, that I've published in March, we found that chatbots are also bad at declining to answer questions that they can't answer accurately. So they'll offer incorrect or speculative answers. And we found that chatbots will also generate fabricated links or cite syndicated or plagiarized copies of articles, which means that even if an audience member or a user decides to click through and check the source, it might not be reliable as well.
This also isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? Google also being squeezed by its competition. Last month, its search usage on Apple's web browser declined for the first time in 22 years. Now, as the competition between these AI companies heats up, your report also looks at the implications for publishers. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of disruption in the search space. We're seeing a lot, as I mentioned, a lot of chatbots are adding live search functionality. Some chatbots or some AI companies that have chatbots are also releasing their own web browsers. I believe recently Perplexity launched an AI-enabled browser called Comet. And so those web browsers and search engines create a lot of competition for Google and for Chrome, which in the US is under a lot of regulatory scrutiny already. And when there's so much competition, there also is a mentality of move fast and break things, and there's not as much consideration of the user experience or the implications for publishers.
Yeah, and publishers who are watching that competition, it seems like they have one of two options: either take legal action or cut a deal.
Right. So over the last 3 or so years, some AI companies have taken the move to approach news organizations and sign content licensing agreements or revenue share agreements. So we've seen several dozen of such agreements take place, largely with American news organizations, because a lot of these companies are American. But we have seen some similar moves in France. Le Monde has a relationship with OpenAI, and AFP has a formal relationship with Mistral, which is a French chatbot. So that is one option, but that is not available to most news organizations. It seems that the AI companies are prioritizing more national organizations. And so the alternative for some is lawsuits over copyright infringement. And we've seen such lawsuits in the US, Canada, and India. And then there's the third way for those who don't have the resources to either engage in a formal content licensing agreement or a lawsuit is something called the robot exclusion protocol. So trying to block crawlers from AI companies that you're not getting compensation from or who you might not trust to represent your content accurately. But even this is not legally binding. It's just a page on a website where you can indicate if you would like crawlers to not access your content. But we've seen evidence that some AI companies appear to be circumventing even that protocol. So it doesn't leave a lot of publishers with a lot of options.
Yeah, and I'm wondering about those publishers that don't sign a deal, that don't seek legal action. If they don't sign a deal with an AI company, is there any idea what happens to the content? Will it be marginalized? Will it be put further below than the companies that do sign a deal? Any idea?
That's a great question. We've seen some evidence, I think it varies by chatbot, but we've seen some evidence that for ChatGPT, for example, publishers that have a licensing deal are more likely to have their content surfaced higher in a search. There's not I don't have clear data on that, but there's a lot of questions right now around how to optimize for search. So over the last 2 decades, news organizations have done a lot to identify what keywords to include or how to represent their content in a way that makes it more likely to appear higher up in a Google search. And so now there's a lot of questions around what that means for chatbots and how they might change the presentation of their content so it's more likely to appear.
And to me, it seems like a given that the tech industry would want a news publisher. If news publishers start going out of business, won't that make AI companies suffer too?
Right, because if there isn't fresh content for users to engage with on the chatbots, then those tools become less useful for users. And so I do think that there's an opportunity here for news organizations to play a bigger role in chatbots and demand more respect from the AI companies who rely so much on their content. So moving forward, I would love to see more transparency from AI companies about how they choose media partners and greater recognition of the value of human reported journalistic content.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Klaudia, thank you so much. Klaudia Jaźwińska from the Toe Center for Digital Journalism. Thank you. And that brings us to our quote of the week. Last month, Google announced a new feature called AI Mode, which will allow users to interact with its search engine as if it were an AI chatbot, as we've been discussing now. Following that announcement, the head of the News Media Alliance, Daniel Coffey, said, quote, "Links were the last redeeming quality of search that gave publishers traffic and revenue. Now Google just takes content by force and uses it with no return." The definition of theft. The DOJ remedies must address this to prevent continued domination of the internet by one company. That's it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.